Good afternoon and welcome to a panel which is going to celebrate everything that's brilliant about Match of the Day, which is 50 years old today. Gary, yes, almost a ripple of applause broke out there. Gary will sing happy birthday to Match of the Day if this goes well in about an hour's time. Let me introduce you to this panel, which is made up of every facet, if you like, of the television process of Match of the Day. Out in the field on Match Day, we have our commentators, and Guy Mowbray, a young buck at 26 years old, won the Newcomer of the Year at the RTS Awards. He won a Sony Gold. He worked for ITV on the Premiership programme, then came to the BBC, where he has been at the heart of our football coverage, both in Match of the Day and live football, the lead commentator at the World Cup at this year and previous World Cups as well.
Robbie's pointed out I've won nothing since.
Since the Sony and the RTS.
He was quite keen to point that out.
Yeah, it was a high place to go from, and it's been a tough ride. But he will tell you all about what it's like being out in the field as a commentator. Robbie Savage started life at Manchester United, briefly, and then moved on to a variety of clubs, spending a lot of time at Leicester, Blackburn Rovers, Birmingham City, Derby County, not necessarily in that order, and of course is now a very well-regarded pundit across a range of media outlets and mediums, and is fairly ubiquitous in the genre, I would say, and previously held the esteemed title of Most Flowing Golden Locks at BBC Sport. I'm delighted I've got that title back. He's recently taken his ponytail and cut it off. For charity?
No.
Oh. Was hoping so. And of course, finally made up this panel by Gary Lineker, who not many people can boast having two top-class careers. Gary was, of course, Golden Boot winner in 1986 at the World Cup, playing for the likes of Leicester. That's the only thing I think he has in common with Robbie, because unlike Robbie, who was at one point the player with the most yellow cards in football, Gary was never, ever given a yellow card or any kind of disciplinary card in his career. So they are opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to good behaviour. Gary, of course, went on to play for Everton, Barcelona, Spurs, Grampus 8, let's not forget the 2 years there as well, an illustrious career for England, and then turned his attention to selling crisps. Not only joking, turned his attention to becoming a top-class broadcaster. Yes, it has, yeah. So there's three careers. A top-class broadcaster, and has been part of the BBC furniture for a very long time now, going from pundit to presenter, taking over Match of the Day 15 years ago. So he's now the longest-serving Match of the Day presenter. And that's what we're here for, to celebrate a programme which somehow has endured, and its popularity remaining as high as ever in the schedules, become a feature of the Saturday schedules for a very long time, 50 years at the heart of Saturday night viewing, which is rather incredible in this day and age of evolving and fast-moving television in so many different ways that we can consume our sport. So we're here to celebrate that, and to do that, let's take a little look back at 50 years of Match of the Day. It's just some of the people who have talked about Match of the Day on a documentary which is on tonight, and also some of the highlights there, of which there are so many, and hopefully we'll be able to tap into a few. But take me back to young Gary at home in Leicester and your early memories of Match of the Day.
I never watched it. That's a lie. I watched it from when I was very young, but when we grew up, of course, you don't get one game, and then it sort of evolved to two, which was a real treat. But and you very rarely got to see your team on there. But when it was Leicester in those days, it was always very special. So it was one of those. It was the one time you were perhaps allowed to stay up a little bit late on a Saturday night, wasn't it? It was Parky, and then it was Match of the Day, and it was always any kid that loves his football will want to stay up and watch Match of the Day, and I was no different.
And in the Savage household, was it a coming together for the family?
Same to Gary and David Beckham, that when you heard the theme tune, I grew up with Grandstand Sports Night, Midweek Sports Special and Match of the Day. The Sports Night tune and the Midweek Sports Special tune, I knew I had to stay in bed. As soon as that Match of the Day theme music come on, my dad would get me out of bed and I was allowed to watch it because it was the weekend.
And as a young boy, Guy, do young commentators think, I could commentate better than that? Or no. did you want to be on as a footballer?
I wanted to be on as a footballer. I'm 42 now, I've missed it. Or they've missed me.
You're older than that, mate.
Yeah, thanks. It's gone as that. But no, exactly the same. That every time I come home on a Saturday night now after commentating on a game, as soon as that music starts, just for a couple of seconds, I'm 8 years old again. Every time. It gets you just every single time.
And then as a player, when you're first on Match of the Day, And, you know, the idea of being famous, you know, is something which now you're very used to being recognised, you're very used to people knowing who you are. Back then, that first time, how special was it?
It was special, but it was a nightmare because the first time I was actually in the featured match on Match of the Day was playing for Leicester at Aston Villa. I can't remember my exact age, but it was probably around 1920. And I missed an absolute sitter from about 5 yards, hit it over the bar. And it was on, and I was sitting there watching it with my family, and they just killed me. And in those days, it was quite rare to be featured. It's not like now, where every game is on. We show the highlights of every match. So, you know, next week you perhaps score a couple. It wouldn't bother. But that was, I think, the only viewing I had that season. And there's just that memory of me hitting it over the bar from 5 yards at Villa Park, which was a bogey ground. I never did ever score there in my whole entire career. But yeah, so my first memory is actually quite possibly my worst memory of the programme.
So go on, then the next time that you were on, and when there were more matches featured, and you got a chance to shine, what was that like? Did the people the next day, you know, if you're out in the park the next day...
I think there were one or two goals in Everton, when I was at Everton.
And do people come up to you the next day because they've seen it on Match of the Day?
It makes a real difference. I mean, I don't know about, like I say, you guys, but you guy even. But Robbie, actually wouldn't apply to you because you never played that well, but I only would watch it. I would only watch it if I'd played well and if I'd scored a goal.
Otherwise you went out.
And it was the same with the newspapers. I'd only ever pick up the newspapers the next day if I'd scored, then I'd buy them all. If I hadn't scored,
we know that
wouldn't
Robbie's a bit
bother
of a
with any of them.
masochist, though, so he probably just tuned in anyway. And obviously, Robbie, you played with teams that are a little bit more recent, perhaps, than Gary, so more matches on. So did it determine whether you watched as to whether the team...
To be fair, when my team's got on, I usually be fast asleep. It's about 12 o'clock. My team's always on last. But for me, my first match today as a player, very similar to Gary, I was playing for Leicester, and Martin O'Neill was manager, and we played Liverpool. It was 2-2, and I did have a good game that day. And John Modson, the commentator, interviewed Martin after the game and said to Martin, Martin, 2-2 against Liverpool. The boys savage. Had a fantastic game today. So I'm sitting there with my mum, my nan, my granddad. I thought, right, yeah, he's going to say something positive. And he went, yeah, savage. You know, he lacks one thing, ability. And it was... So Match of the Day to the millions. Not only was I a bad player, I had no ability whatsoever, according to Martin O'Neill. So.
Do you realise the kind of things that you're saying on these commentaries, Guy, how they can impact on a family's enjoyment of their son's experience?
The thing that I like about it is, you know, they all watch. There's no doubt about it. Players of every era have always gone back to watch it, be it Sunday morning, Saturday night. You know it's going to get listened to at some point, and it does come back to bite you at times. You will be taken to task on arrival at a ground the next week, not just by the players and the managers, but by supporters as well. They're very keen to stop you on your way from your car to the ground and give you what for.
And does that affect what you say then? Are you mindful of
Not
that?
especially, but I'm not that disappointed that a certain Luis Suarez has left the Premier League, because he did get a reaction. And what we said about him got a reaction every week.
You know, as a player, obviously Gary presenting, and, you know, I grew up with Hansen and Laurel. And I remember phoning up, getting Alan Hansen's number once. I played for Birmingham against Chelsea. I remember catching Mattia Kesman with an elbow, and I was trying to palm him off, and he was quite small, so I caught him in the jaw.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of incident that leads you to pick up more yellow cards than any other player in the country, just because you're being picked on.
But it wasn't a red.
Don't you hate short players?
Yeah. So I got Alan's number, and I phoned up Match of the Day and said, can I get, speak to Alan Hansen? I said, I just want to put my point of view across to him. So I've got him. I said, listen, mate, I'm on Match of the Day tonight.
That'd have gone well for a start.
I said, do me a favour. I said, I haven't done it on purpose. I've caught him. If you watch it, you can see I've not done it on purpose. Anyway, he said, I'll have a look for you, mate. So when I'm sitting at home watching it, and he's absolutely battered me. He said, shocking, absolutely shocking. Can't do that, 3-game ban.
He hadn't noticed the incident before.
Cheers. And I made him tea ever since on a Saturday afternoon.
So a lot of people won't remember necessarily because you've made such an impact in 15 years in the hot seat, but you had a period of time sitting where Robbie and Alan did, being the pundit and analysing and criticising and critiquing performances, but you had Des Lynam in that hot seat, and I'm guessing you were learning all the time. from him.
Yeah, I knew what I wanted to do, and I couldn't have had a sort of better mentor, if you like, than Des, who for me is the doyen of sports presenters. He was brilliant. I learnt so much from being alongside him. It was for, a period of about, I did a bit spasmodically when I was still playing at the end of my career, and then did a couple of years as a Match of the Day pundit alongside Des, which was terrific. I learnt so many, just little things. When he introduced the guests, for example, he would never ever say joining me tonight. He would always say joining us tonight, because you include in your audience, which just little things like that. But he used to say, be brave enough to try and add a bit of humour with your closing line, sometimes with your opening line. He's, and he quite rightly said sometimes it'll work and sometimes you'll fall on your backside. But he said it just makes a little bit of a difference, even to be remembered in those sort of ways. And as well as as how he would engage with the panel as well, and the fact he was constantly listening and he was ready with a quick riposte when necessary. So, no, he was the best for me, Des.
Well, in 1999 even, you finally moved into the hot seat. Should we have a little look and remind ourselves what happened? Oh, nice words from Des, the master. And of course, before Des, there was Jimmy Hill, David Coleman, Kenneth Wolstenholme. And, this is a legendary list of broadcasters that you followed there.
I remember it to this day, that when he'd left, 1999, I was told by the BBC doorman at Television Centre there, that I was driving in on, I can't remember what day of the week it was, but he said, terrible news. I said, what's that? He went, Des Lynam's gone to ITV. I went, has he? And it was truly dreadful news for everyone in the country.
Apart from you.
Apart from me, which is not necessarily a good thing. But he said, any idea who might get the job? He said, I said, I hope so, yes, along those lines. But it was something along those lines, and I went upstairs, and they pretty much told me straight away that the job was mine.
The job was yours.
So it was great.
And what about that transition from being the person who's being asked the questions to asking the questions, and sometimes knowing the answer yourself? Quite often, I would imagine.
I think most of us think we know the answers anyway. So I never found that problem. I'd done quite a lot of radio prior to that, and I had presented Football Focus for quite a while as well before going into the Match of the Day chair. I've never found that. If I feel strongly about something and I want to put in my opinion, I generally do it in a question, and then it's up to them whether they agree with me. So there are ways around that on specific occasions. Or it's with Match of the Day, it's tricky because there's not much time, and we might get 2 or 3 minutes between each matches, and it's very difficult for these guys doing their punditry. You can't really go off at a tangent and have a debate about something, otherwise we might have to drop a game at the end, which I don't think will go down terribly well. So you're quite restricted in that. So, but in something like the World Cup, where we've just been working, all of us together, we've got big periods of time, half an hour before the game, 15 minutes half time, another 20 minutes, half an hour at the end of the game, where we could turn it into a debate, a discussion. I can put my view in when I feel strongly about something. So I've never really found it a problem.
So what makes me think that Gary and yourself, when you're a pundit and you're working with presenters, that you give us time to speak. That's what makes it good, that when Gary or yourself asks a question...
Yeah, thanks for that, Robbie.
You give us time to speak. Do you know what I mean? And that's refreshing, because some presenters, sometimes it's all about them. But in your case, and Gary's case, you give the pundit time to speak, and I think that's important.
Thanks, Robbie.
So I'm just telling you.
Thanks.
I'm boring, you just say.
Guy, let's talk about the anatomy of a Saturday, and we'll start out in the field, if you like, because actually you're out there wearing the coats and the scarves, getting cold on the terraces, and these guys are inside an office in Salford. So first of all, your match. When do you find out which match you're going to?
It's about 6 to 7 weeks before. We're through to the end of September at the moment. The October schedule will be coming out, I think, in the next couple of weeks. So we've got plenty of time to think about the games we're going to be doing and start preparing for them. For example, the work for this coming Saturday probably started on, Monday,
Remind us
Tuesday.
what you're doing this Saturday?
I'm at Everton against Arsenal tomorrow, and then Sunderland against Manchester United on Sunday. And The prep for that, the hard prep, you watch everything. That's just a given. And then the hard prep with the notes. I have a rule of thumb, particularly in the early part of the season, it's probably 2 full working days of stuff for any one game. It gets a little bit easier as the season goes on because you've seen the teams, you've got the notes, you can just recycle them a little bit. But at the start of the season, it's pretty, I wouldn't say hard graft, it's not. Let's be honest, it's a paid hobby. You know, I think of many, many worse things to do. It never actually stops, if I'm honest. I often get asked, how many hours do you work in a week? It's impossible to quantify. You can't put a finger on it, low or high. It depends on the week, it depends on the game you've got. And it is all about, you know, a lot of people say they work for the weekends. So do I, the other way around. Living for the weekend for another reason.
It's great though on Monday nights and Wednesday nights when there's football, isn't it? And you're
Yeah.
sitting there, oh, you're watching the football again? Work.
Yeah, exactly. I can have control of the remote for that reason. Yeah, absolutely right.
So how far in advance of the kick-off would you get to the ground?
I get to a ground, again, a standard rule is aim to get there 3 hours before kick-off, and then if anything happens and you are delayed, even if you're there half an hour before, at least just make sure you're there. You talk to other colleagues in the press area, gather what other little bits of information might have developed that you might have missed, grab a word with personalities from the 2 teams if you possibly can, although that is getting a lot harder than it used to be. Managers aren't quite as free with their phone numbers as they used to be. You don't have the same rapport with the players as perhaps commentators used to have in the past. We used to have players' numbers that we could just ring, and you didn't have to go through a press officer. You could ring them and get comment and ask them what they thought just straight away. It's a little bit harder now, even though they're there to make it easier. It is a little bit harder because we have to go through the club because there are so many party lines they have to follow. So a few more hoops to jump through. And then you're just building up to the game, really. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own routine. I don't get in a zone or anything. I know some people study their notes for half an hour before kick-off and get right into it. I tend to chat about anything to anybody.
Experience, having sat next to you quite a lot this summer at England games, is the experience very different for a match of the day commentary to a live England commentary?
Not for me. I think it is for some people, but I always work on it's going live somewhere, and the commentary is wholly live, and it's the only way to do it. I always think you can tell if something's been dubbed on afterwards pretty easily, because you just can't convey what you feel, the excitement, your reaction at the time later on. You can't do it. Occasionally there are technical difficulties and they might say the sound dropped out there. Could you give us that line on the goal again? Not really, no, because it's gone and none of us are very good actors.
At the other end of the line, if you like, when your commentary's being fed back to the edit suites in Salford, somebody's making a decision about what's going to go into that 7 minutes of coverage. Do you ever ring up and say, I really think you should do this, or I don't think you should do that, or I wouldn't like you to put that line in, I didn't mean that, or...
That's happened. And will again. No, we have a conversation with whoever is editing the game throughout the game. I might put pointers to them, they'll put pointers to me, they'll tell me I'm wrong quite frequently. And it is just an ongoing process, and eventually you develop a rapport with the person doing it, or with the people doing it. We've got a great team of skilled editors, and you trust them to put in what's right. I'm not big on if I've done a line, oh, that must be in, because if I've delivered it in the wrong place, that's my tough luck. You know, just put it in as it is. I've done it live, you cut it down. And that, to me, is the only way to do it.
So about 2 hours after the game, Guy finally leaves the ground and heads home, ready to watch Match of the Day. Meanwhile, in Salford, let's do the what's going on in the anatomy of the day in the green room. Robbie, you can describe for us what it looks like there.
So, for instance, tomorrow, I think there's 5 or 6 games, so every game will be on the screen. I'll choose a game. One, Alan Shearer is not chosen. I think there's a hierarchy, because Alan, I would say, is the number 1 after the other Alan's left, and rightly so. I think he's, you know, come on leaps and bounds. Not saying he was rubbish before, but he was brilliant before.
You were doing so well. You were doing so well.
I think he's improved massively. He's actually got off the fence. So Alan will pick a game. I think he'll probably pick the Chelsea game or the Everton-Arsenal game tomorrow. And I'll probably pick Crystal Palace-West Ham, because I want to see the way West Ham play, if it's fair on Sam Allardyce or not. So I'll watch that game. All the games will be going on. Alan will be watching his game. And as Guy says, we'll have the team behind us, keep an eye on other games. So then you'll just be making your notes all the way through. We'll be sitting there, Twitter will be going berserk, you're looking at that, and we have a bit of fun. We chat to each other.
I think it's called friendly banter these days.
Friendly banter.
Careful.
And it's great because when you're with football people in the same room, you can't beat the dressing room as a player, and that's my only fix now, being with a group of people with the same mentality as me. Some people might question what age that is, but it's great, and it's as Guy has said before, you're getting paid for watching football with legends. I didn't get to that state of a legend, but I'm sitting with Gary and Ruud Gullit, Alan Shearer, talking football on a Saturday afternoon. So you watch a game, and then you go into the edit suite, and it's your analysis. So at 10:30, when you're delivering the analysis, it's yours. You live or die by it. And it's I would say it's the hardest TV show to do in sport in terms of time you have and talking over a clip for a minute and a half. It's very difficult.
That's perhaps what people don't necessarily realise, is that all the pundits, even though they're focusing on one specific game that they're then going to go and do the analysis for, have got to be really across everything, because something might occur in one of the other games that you will then ask some questions about at 10:30.
Well, I think the way it works is we've got two pundits, so they can only really cover 4 games on a normal Saturday. So there's one will do the early game. They'll both be designated matches at 3 o'clock, and then there's usually a later game, and the one that didn't do the early game will do the later game. So you've got 4 matches that they can do a proper analysis on. They can't really do any sort of proper analysis on the other games that are taking place, but there are those of us in the office, like myself, I'll just look around for stories, things we might be able to talk around. The editor, the producer will do the same. Then we've got the guys who are actually doing the edits of the matches, and they're told to tell us if there's anything that we should look at. So we do it that way. So on those other games, it's more probably a case of an extraordinary event, a great goal, a bad decision. Those sort of things we're keeping an eye on. But in terms of the proper analysed matches, you can only do them if you really very much concentrated on that particular game, I would say.
And in terms of the order the matches come, which we know is a contentious thing, who has the ultimate say?
The editor. Unless everyone agrees with the order, then it's me. But no, the editor, but he will. I'll talk with the editor as well.
He'll go with the mood of the room.
He'll go with the mood of the room, but ultimately it's decision. And do you know what? 90% of the time, it pretty much picks itself. And people would disagree, but they generally disagree about where their team is on. That's what I've found on Twitter. I've never known anyone, even on Twitter, complain where a team wasn't on. Their team was on earlier than it should have been, or somebody else's team was on too late. It's all about
their team.
Yeah. So it generally picks itself, but ultimately the editor has the say, although we will debate it as the afternoon
Well, you've
goes
been
on.
through a few pundits in your 15 years of Match of the Day, and there are a few more new faces this season. But let's have a little look at what makes a good pundit. It's heartening, and it's actually brilliant to hear footballers saying it means so much, because you know that their performances mean a lot, and footballers are quite often, especially in these times, given criticism for not caring and not really bothering what fans think, and they just go out there and do a job, and they do all really care, don't they?
Of course they care. Nobody likes to be criticised, but most of the players, most of the time, will understand when they're criticised because they know themselves. And it was the same when I was on it. It's like that time I hit you over the bar, you expect a little bit of stick for that. So, but occasionally they will disagree, like that one. But by and large, I think they respect the fact that these players have been there. They've done it themselves, and I think that's a very, very important part of the show, and of these guys that have actually performed at the highest level. They've been through these situations, so therefore they are qualified.
Yeah, nobody sits as a pundit on Match of the Day who hasn't played at the top level of English football.
No, or internationally generally as well. So, and I think that's almost a prerequisite, I would say. Otherwise, I think it's kind of difficult if you brought in a sort of maybe lower league player or even a journalist or whatever, someone who's not been there can't be overly critical in terms of that they can be, but they're not going to get.
But on Match
that
of the Day,
respect
that
of
is the
players.
benchmark, isn't it?
I
Compared
would,
to...
I would say so. That's what we've gone with, rightly or wrongly, over the years, and I think remains so to this day. So I think that's the way it is, and some people disagree with that. Some people would like to see a journalist on there,
But there are other programmes. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
we
there
have
are.
6 million over the weekend watching Match of the Day, 10 million watching football programmes on the BBC over the weekend, guys. So there are other programmes and areas that people from various levels of football, if you like, can contribute.
There are, but I heard a lovely phrase to describe Match of the Day a couple of weeks ago, and I heard somebody say it was the nation's season ticket. And this is accessible to everybody. This is everybody's programme, and everybody that I know certainly watches it. I always find it refreshing. We heard Rio Ferdinand there say about he used to take it personally. Well, I hope he wasn't watching last Saturday. Goodness me, he'd have taken that personally. He took it a bit personally when he was criticised for his performances. But then, if you saw the documentary that he did during the World Cup that was on the day after the final, or a couple of days after the final, it was really nice for me to hear him say, I didn't realise this is really hard, this is difficult. Because I think there's a perception amongst current players, I don't know if Robbie will back me up, that I could go and do that when I finish. I don't think they think about, actually, how technically and mentally difficult it is to do. I've had a load of phone calls from players I've dealt with over the years. Can you get me on? Can you get me on the radio? Can you get me on the television? And I think, well, no, you can't just do it. It doesn't work like that.
Did you, Robbie, when you made that transition from player to pundit, was there ever a point where you thought, I've got a few scores to settle here? There's a few people that I'll keep an eye out for, and I won't hold back on?
A few, yeah. There's a few this season, probably. But you can, Match of the Day is the type of show that if you want to have if you want to get somebody back, you can edit your analysis to hammer somebody if you want to. Not
But you don't, obviously.
No, you have to be fair. And I think, for instance, last season, I was doing a thing on West Brom and the wing backs, and my pal Stephen Reid had an absolute shocker in the first half. So I thought, I've got to stick by my guns. He's my pal, but I've got to say it how it is. And that's why I'm on there. I'm not on there because I won trophies. Well, I won one. I'm on there because I like to think that I will say what other people don't say, fairly and honestly. So I said, I done my analysis on Stephen Reid, and I had a go at him. I said he was awful, out of position, couldn't run, lost his legs, loads of things.
Apart from that,
he played well.
Did you text him first to let him know?
No, so I'd done it. But second half, he done much better. So it was a balance. I said first half, he was all over the place. Second half, he done well. And then when I got back into the makeup room after, which I was there for a while, I had a text on my phone off Stephen saying, there's no friends in this game, is there? So you got to be honest and fair, whether it's your friend. You know, I tell Gary that where I live in Manchester, all the Man City players, Man United players, and all the kids go to the same school. So if I'm on a Saturday and I've hammered Julian Lescott or somebody, I actually see him in the playground. It's quite difficult.
You are the playground bully, then, obviously.
It's quite difficult. It is awkward because you're thinking, wow, what are they going to say to me? But to be fair, as Gary says, most of them know if they've had a bad game. Do you know what I mean?
And you touched upon it, Gary, the time constraints. I think you've also done this as well, Robin, as we've been chatting about Match of the Day. And it is a very succinct analysis. It has to be to get all those matches in. And it therefore is it takes a certain kind of pundit to be able to deliver that.
It's genuinely not easy. Most television programmes, if you see them, if you've got somebody talking over a piece of videotape, as we call it, if in analysis, for example, whether it varies between 40 seconds and some will go as long as 2 minutes, they would almost, I think, invariably record that prior to any show, but Match of the Day is always live. So to do that and find the words to articulate what you're trying to say, etc., over the given action and put your points over in an intelligent manner is actually not that easy. It's a really difficult thing to do, and people don't get it. And we don't have time, as we've said before. It's very, very structured show. It's not, other channels, Sky, for example, have done football brilliantly, but it's a different animal. It's a totally different kind of audience. We're not really there just for the, people that are anoraks about football that want to see loads of analysis. We can't do a 3-hour show and and talk and talk and talk. It's very different. We don't have 7 minutes to discuss and dissect a corner kick and what happened and who lost whose marker. It's a different thing. But the guys do it really well. But it takes some learning.
It's the most nerve-wracking chair in the world. That match of the day chair, when you're just about to do analysis.
I think you're slightly overdoing it.
To be fair, he won't be on Mastermind.
I really honestly think it's when you honestly.
Listen, you weren't there for his first one.
It's so nerve-wracking. It is, honestly, it's so nerve-wracking.
I was there, Robbie, when you did your first match of the day, and Alan Hansen made you feel welcome, didn't he?
Dancing on Strictly and match of the day chair is the most nerve-wracking thing you've ever done in life.
Hansen didn't necessarily ease you in, did he?
Well, obviously, the first match of the day, obviously, Alan Hansen, I think he's been the best pundit, and as the longevity he had to 20-odd years to do that show, and he still got nervous. I remember saying to him, you still get nervous? He said, yeah, every time I do analysis. He said, my first match of the day, he said, I've been told by my wife Janet to be nice to you tonight. And I thought, oh, thank you very much, Alan. And then as he sits back and he looks at you like that, you know he's going to come for you. And he comes for you on a few occasions. And I've looked at him and he's gone like that. I think, oh, no.
But you feel welcome now? You feel
oh,
like you're
brilliant,
part of
honestly. You know, for me as well, because I never... Okay, I played in the top flight, but because I never...
You've got to let that go.
Yeah. Because I was never at the top. I think if you're Alan Shearer and being at the top, you can afford to maybe be an 8 or 9 out of 10. But for me, I think I've got to be 11 out of 10 every week to have my opinion across, to gain the respect. Hopefully, I think I've done that now. And I'm different because I won't sit on the fence.
Yeah, it's that lack of confidence really holding you back.
Yeah, we've got to work on that. We're trying. We're trying to bring him out of himself. We are. We're all working on it. Gary, do you look across football and now, and when you see the post-match interviews and think, he'd be good, let's keep an eye on him? Because we've got some new faces coming in this season.
Yeah, we're always looking. Obviously, people more important than me make such decisions, but I'm included in conversations, which is great. And we're always looking for the next really... Ooh, that was weird. The next really good one. And it's, as we said, it's a difficult skill, so that they're few and far between. So, but you see a player interviewed and he's quite articulate and puts his points across very well. You think, yeah, possibly. And,
who of the current younger players, so the mid-20s players, do you think comes? I mean, you see them.
Quite young, isn't it, to start?
Yeah, but you sometimes you do an interview with somebody.
The hard thing for that is there aren't many English-speaking ones in the Premier League at the moment at that stage of the career that freely give interviews, because clubs do try to protect them as well, so they don't give that many interviews, to be honest, to get to know them. I don't think they come out themselves until later on, to be honest.
I think the recent one, the recent one, I think would have been Paul Scholes. So I think he says a lot, doesn't he? Now, didn't say much when he played.
Didn't say anything.
For years. So you never would have spotted Paul Scholes as a pundit, would you? No. You never would have during his playing career necessarily.
Well, he's certainly got the career for it and the stature as a footballer, but no, because he never... And you can sort of see that in his early performances, that he's not done too much television, but he says what he thinks, which is important, and he's got that stature. So if he trains on in terms of the actual broadcasting element of the business, he could do really well.
That's the important thing I was going to say, isn't it? Because you've got some players who are students of the game and encyclopedias in terms of knowledge. Then you've got others who can talk and aren't afraid to express an opinion. And you can have both, obviously, as well, Robbie. But then it's marrying, isn't it? And getting that perfect combination.
Yeah. And the other thing as well, especially when it comes to analysis, it's very easy just to describe what you see in terms of, well, he goes down the wing, he crosses the ball, he heads it in. Well, we can all see that. But the really good ones, and Hansen was the guy who broke the mould on this. He didn't just describe what we'd already seen for ourselves, but he'd give you something different, like an analytical thing about how the defenders move, or who's out of position where, and why he's out of position. And the really good pundits are the ones that make you look, when you're looking at someone's analysis, you go, oh yeah. And that's happened to me, with Alan Hansen. I can't tell you how many times over the years that he's been doing the live thing, and I've gone, oh yeah, I didn't realise that. And I played for forever at the top. But in terms of defensive side of the game, he's no clue about strikers. But certainly in that aspect, he educated me.
And do you think he changed the role and changed what was expected and the standards of punditry?
Yeah, he went down a path that many others have followed. he was the first one that just got away from that, just showing the goals, and let's show some sort of tactical shape of the team, or somebody's bad positional play. He was the first one that did that. Many others have followed. Some have followed really well, and others have less well.
I think Alan Shearer did it last week on the first Swansea goal at Manchester United. Now, I'd been at that game and commentated on it. And I knew it was a good goal. I knew it was a very good team goal. I wish I'd started counting the passes, but you never do that because you don't know where it's leading. No. But his analysis afterwards, it was broken down from back to front, from the Swansea penalty area all the way forward, bit by bit. Defender's there, why is he there? Yeah. He's moved wide, why has he done that? And we basically saw it was taken apart like a thesis in 1 minute.
It was very good.
Which was excellent to see. I went, oh yeah, I didn't curse myself for not spotting it at the time.
What about technology, Robbie? How comfortable are you with using new technology to help
I think
explain?
It's great. I think we use Opta, and heat maps, and I think that's where it's changed. That on a Saturday now you get so much information from different sources. Opta, you can see how far a player's run, what position he was on the pitch, and now I think using them graphs on Match of the Day has become fantastic. Number of touches in a certain area, and what it does, it backs up your opinion. I think that's what you use them good. That's where it's really good tool. So, I think so.
It's not great. Using it for the sake of it, but to back up an argument. It's got a place on Match. Is it harder to integrate on Match of the Day than say a Sky Live game where you have got more time both before? Well, and
everything's
after?
Harder than have it live matches. Live matches, it was wonderful to do them during the World Cup, and I'm thrilled we've got the FA Cup back because it's important for us to have live football as well. But we're always limited on Match of the Day. Often we have to fit in 8 matches, and we're limited to how much time we can have for the show, what time we're on, all those sort of things, and it's like a mathematical equation, just working it out as it goes on because it's live as well. So we are limited, yes, but we plan it as much as we possibly can during the Saturday, and after the game's finished, when we sit down, decide the order, and in terms of what kind of technology we're going to use, whether we're going to involve people with some sort of Twitter discussion these days. Everything's moving on. You have to move with it, and I think Match of the Day's done that, and it won awards last season for that side of it. So which is good.
You do have to move. You do have to evolve, but the enduring appeal of Match of the Day in 50 years is incredible to be at the heartland of the Saturday schedules. Isn't that because it's so simple?
It's simple. It works. It's your Saturday fix of football. That was what you described
the nation's
before.
Season ticket.
The nation's season ticket to the games. We show a little, and I think the most significant movement in Match of the Day's history was when we got the rights back after we lost it to ITV in 2001. We got it back in 2004. And I sat down with the guys when we got it back and said, is there any way we can show all the matches? Because prior to that it was 2 and maybe a little bit of another one and then just the goals. And it was expensive, and you obviously go via different ways of doing it, but it was back, that decision, and it's made a massive difference, huge difference, because everyone gets their game now. Even if the thing they moan about now is it's on whether they're on last or not, but at least they're on.
The dialogue and the conversation.
4 or 5 minutes of any game can look good.
Yeah.
However bad it may be.
But if you've been at that game and you've decided there was one incident you wanted to see a Match of the Day and it wasn't there, you can bet your bottom dollar they will tweet you and tell you about it. It's the biggest conversation you'll ever have, I think, Match of the Day, compared to any other programme, isn't it, in terms of Twitter and the feedback that you get, not all of which is pleasant. Guy, let's just briefly, before we throw it out to all of you, let's just talk a little bit about what the others are doing. Do you as a commentator look at BT Sport and Sky and ITV?
Yeah, I watch everything. It's just part of the job. You don't want to miss anything. I'm not one who particularly listens specifically to other commentators. It's more for watching the game and making sure when you're covering that team next, you know what's been going on. But you do pick up things from other people, naturally along the way. Just going back to the editing thing, one thing I get taken to task about quite a lot is that wasn't a fair reflection of the game. And I get that quite a lot in 5 or 6 minutes. And they'll say something like, we battered them, and that didn't show. Well, you can have 90% of possession, but if the 6 best chances went to the other team, they're what's going to go in. And I think we get it right, probably 90-odd% of the time.
I think going back to Twitter, myself and Gary will sit there on a Saturday night and say, don't look at your mentions when you come off the show, because you have fans from all the country absolutely hammering you going back to myself and Guy in the World Cup, we'd done a game, and we thought we'd done well. We get in the car, first thing you do is you look Twitter, oh, we've done well, let's look at positivity about ourselves. The first tweet I got was to myself and Guy, and it was, "Die, we hope you drown in petrol." which was brilliant. But that's Twitter, you know, you're not going to please everybody.
You can't please a football
That
fan.
was USA against Ghana, and that came from a bloke in Manchester. Very upset.
Your reach is great. On a positive note, who are the lovely guys to you know, because you see them all on the grounds. These guys, you know, are locked up in a dark room in Salford. Who are the managers that you love speaking to these days?
We have I think managers these days are just generally more media friendly because they have to be. It's part of their job now. I feel sorry for them after the game. I know I shouldn't, but I do a little bit because I sometimes think, can't they just do one interview? Because it is constant. They go from one broadcast to the next, to the next, to the next, to radio, to the press, and they're saying the same things over and over again. And sometimes if you're at the bottom of the queue, we're pretty high up at Match of the Day. We pretty much get them first or second, which is great. But you can see their patience starting to wear thin. So sometimes it's not a surprise that they turn on you with the most innocent of questions. So I'm always asked who are the horrible ones. I try not to talk about that because I don't view any of them as horrible. I view them as a bit of a challenge, some of them. But you remember the nice guys. And at the moment in the Premier League, just off the top of my head, Steve Bruce and Roberto Martinez are two of the guys it's an absolute joy to deal with because they'll be honest, they'll be courteous, they'll be respectful. They won't try and be clever with you and think that if your question's rubbish, fair enough, but by all means. But they're generally two of the really good guys around. And I like it when a manager's honest. I think sometimes they do try to not pull the wool over supporters' eyes, but I think sometimes they're looking at it just purely from their team's standpoint and trying to paper over the cracks, if you like. Louis van Gaal last week, and apparently it is Van Gaal. I've been told by the club to say Van Gaal. So that's the way we're going with that one. He took me aback a little bit because we've been told that he was a bit of a prickly customer. And my first question, I simply gave him an easy in by asking what his verdict was on Manchester United. Essentially, what are your thoughts on the performance? And he must have been that far away from me, but verdict? And I thought, here we go, this is going to be a rare old season with this chap. But then he was fine, and in the interview I thought his honesty was fantastic. I mean, he really did. I came away from it thinking, well, I didn't think United were that bad. But he obviously did, and it was his opinion that mattered.
They were awful.
One
but he
more
really
for you, Gary,
said so as well.
Before we go out to the floor, I presented Jackie Oatley's been a commentator on Match of the Day, so women have been involved in the programme. Do you see another female commentator lending their voice to the show at some point?
Quite possibly. I don't see why not. And you know, as the game evolves, you know, in terms of punditry, well, as we've said before, our sort of prerequisite is that they've played in the Premier League itself. So, you know, that's going to be difficult. But you know, the BBC, we have a lot of women's football now. It's getting more popular, stronger. It's great that that women's football is not only growing right around the world, but we're showing plenty of it. We have lots of really good women pundits covering that football, and long may that continue.
Good stuff. Okay, well, let's go out. Is there anybody out there who would like to have a question? If you do, could you tell us your name, where you're from, and the question? There are some mics roaming, so there's a gentleman there.
Hi there. Oh, my name's Tom. I'm a Spurs fan. Robbie, you mentioned the importance of the dressing room. Are we going to see that American trend of coverage coming from inside the changing room during matches? I think that's something that will proliferate into the UK.
Coverage inside the dressing room.
I don't think so. I think they do it on a few shows in the early rounds of the FA Cup. I think they do it on BT and the conference. But in terms of the Premier League, I don't think it would happen. I think it's a very, sacred place, a changing room. I don't think it would happen.
Be good though.
It'd be good, yeah. It would be very
always try
entertaining.
to
Of course, it would. To
get
see.
in as when we were as ITV doing the Champions League, we always tried to get into dressing rooms on the live games to do the opening links. But clubs are so protective.
It keeps getting asked about, doesn't it? They keep pushing for it. But what's so sacred, by the way, in those dressing rooms?
Well, it's just, emotions, the smell. We can't see that on the telly, obviously.
Rather than sacred.
In a word, no.
It's just, unless you've been in the dressing room after the game as a player, it's just I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think he knows.
No. No idea, Tom.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Jeff Hill, editor of ITV News. One of the debates we're having in our world is about the survivability of a format. You know, like yourself, we've had a format in television news that's existed for many, many years because people depend on it. It's reliable, it's authoritative, just like Match of the Day. But there is obviously a threat from the digital world, and people can get goals from many different sources on digital, online, etc. So I just wondered, I know that we all love the format of Match of the Day, but is that enough for survival in the future? Are you doing any more? And so finally, one plea, Robbie, as a Palace fan, can you go easier with us on Saturday, please? Because we're having enough trouble as it is.
I'm sure he will. Well, I think the truth there is in the fact that the viewing figures remain astonishingly high. In fact, they've grown over the last few years, which defies really the way most, certainly highlights programs are going in other things. So, and hopefully that will continue. It doesn't seem to affect our show whatsoever, these new apps showing goals or even streaming, illegal streaming or whatever it is. Hasn't had any adverse effect on the amount of people that watch and enjoy Match of the Day. So hopefully that will remain the same. But obviously you've got to try and move and stay ahead of the game. But it's surprising in many ways that it's continued to be so successful. But and hopefully we can make sure that it continues to be that way. It is much loved. It's almost a staple diet of football fans in this country. And it's the season ticket.
It's the same every year, but it's always a little bit different every year.
I think
it's constantly evolved.
And I was at ITV at the time when the Premiership came over to ITV, moving the time to 7:30, the tactics truck, various other innovations. It didn't need to be reinvented. The wheel didn't need to be reinvented. And I think when it went back to BBC, kind of strip it back to what it was about, which was top-class pundits chatting about football highlights. And I think that is its essence, isn't it?
It's still about the action, isn't it? That's still the be-all and end-all of the programme.
It's very much about the action, and it's just about striking that balance between being mostly action and some analysis and some chat, isn't it? And talking about the big moments of the day. And there's a balance in there, and I think over the years we've sort of got towards where it is. And, some people say, well, it's the same old show, it's still doing the same old thing. Well, how else would you do it? That's what I always say. What would you do?
If
nobody ever comes up with an
want
answer
to
to that
watch
to
it.
change it that would be for the better.
Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman here.
I've got a mic, so can I, Dan Corn from Discovery.
Jump in.
I'm from London, I'm a Manchester United fan. I'm always interested in the relationship of the pundits with one another, and it sometimes comes across in sort of glances that they have with one another. The one I'm particularly worried about is Mark Lawrenson, because you always look at him as if he's sort of got some disability, and I have to say, I think Alan Hansen's the worst at this. Whenever Mark Lawrenson talks, Hansen used to look at him as if to say, "You blithering idiot, what are you talking about?" Now, how do you pundits get on? And are you sort of generally in sympathy, or if you disagree with one another, do you feel quite free to say, "Actually, I think you're wrong about that"?
Are you pitching for a series on the Discovery Channel?
I'm actually pitching for a series on Mark Lawrenson, to be honest.
I think when you come off a show and people are saying, for instance, Alan Shearer might have been looking at me as if I didn't know what I was talking about, which possibly could be right. But the relationship with the pundits, we're all there in the afternoon, we're all mates. I think Gary will say that. We're all mates, we all get on, and it's just a difference of opinion. I think you can disagree. I think it's healthy to disagree. Only if you really disagree. I listen to radio shows and stuff, and people say things for the sake of getting a reaction. I think on Match of the Day, you're honest, and if you disagree, I disagree with Hansen last year. I was brave. It was about the strike force. It was. I think I said I'd rather take Sturridge and Suarez over Van Persie and Rooney, and I think he disagreed, and I was proven right, and that's why I was finished. You got to move with the times. But Laurel, Laurel gets...
It's
stick.
usually one of Laurel's jokes that makes us look that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, Laurel gets a lot of sticks for his shirts, but he's great. Laurel, honestly, I've got to say, you know, Matt Lawrenson, he won so many trophies with Liverpool. He works hard. You know, and Laurel's one of the pundits who will go to on 5 Live. He'll go to Preston against somebody and do a 5 Live game. You know, because he loves football. And I think when he's on Football Focus or Match of the Day, you know, he's a joy to work with. I can honestly say that. And he's great in the
very
dressing room.
inclusive as
He's
well.
brilliant.
Yeah,
Honestly.
he's very
If you
inclusive.
think he didn't get on with Hansen, that partnership was pretty good.
Pretty good, yes.
He's a
Yeah.
top bloke.
No, he's very inclusive.
I enjoyed that clip of Jimmy Hill and Terry Venables. If we could get back to that, it'd be tremendous.
You know, there's a big thing Saturday.
Just go to this gentleman here, sorry.
It was Alan
Oh,
Shearer.
hang on,
and-
Robbie wants to say something.
It was Alan Shearer and Drew Dullett.
Yeah, history
And
there.
obviously, you know, Hullett left him out, didn't he?
Yeah.
And they worked together in the World Cup, and they get on fine.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
Hi, Chris Sansom, Forbidden Technologies. As a Spurs fan for 30 years, this is my Graceland. And no doubt, Gary, for you, the highlight of your career was winning the FA Cup with us. But I don't want to bring the tone down too much, but I wonder whether or not you believe, this question for all of you guys, whether the media has a responsibility for players like Paul Gascoigne, for example, who is in the news again this morning. Does there need to be some support there from the media, from the clubs on a much bigger scale? Because clearly it's not working for him, is it?
I think ultimately it's got to come from Gazza himself. I think I can honestly say we've supported him over the years, and lots of people have, Tottenham have, his friends have, and yeah, I just, you know, wish him well, but ultimately it's got to come from Paul.
I'd agree with that. The pictures this morning were desperately sad.
Yeah, just
Really desperate.
Okay. Can we move on to another question? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Adam. I'm from Manchester, and I'm a Manchester City fan. The question was...
point taken.
Apologies. The question was, you spoke a lot about limitations on the kind of main show Saturday night, and about kind of perhaps other networks being able to appeal to the Anorak fan, and ones requiring a bit more of a detailed. Do you think that there's any scope for Match of the Day to evolve to, you know, kind of meet that demand, perhaps in another part of the schedule or online?
I think it kind of does, doesn't
I
it?
think Match of the Day 2,
Match of the
possibly.
Day 2, you've got obviously Football Focus, final scores on during the afternoon. You've got Match of the Day
2 Extra.
2
Sunday
Extra,
Extra.
which is when we sometimes include journalists as well, and we've had obviously some of the female football pundits on there as well. So I think 10 million over a weekend is a much bigger reach than any other broadcaster who's broadcasting football over the weekend. So I would argue that those boxes are very much ticked.
Oh, they are, yeah. Match of the Day itself, we're restricted time-wise and certain aspects by the rights as well. So you don't take that so far. But yeah, I think Gabby's answered it perfectly.
Is there a mic over there?
Hi, I'm John Bear. 2 quick questions. Is there too much football on TV? And what professional advice would you give Phil Neville?
Who wants that one? Is there too much football on TV? It's your choice whether you watch it or not, has always been my answer to that one. So that's perfectly... I think I mean, there's a lot of football on television that's out there for people who want to watch it. If you don't want to watch it, it doesn't seem to be, which is my primary concern has always been that it affects the attendances that go to matches, because football doesn't look as good on television if there's not a full house. But that's certainly not happened at the top level as of yet. I think the amount of money that flows into the game from television should enable the clubs, it doesn't yet, but should enable the clubs not to charge so much to go to the games. I think it's ridiculously expensive given the amount of TV revenue that they get. What was the other question? I forgot.
Advice for Phil Neville. Guy, you...
Keep working hard. He's doing really well, Phil.
You commentated with him obviously during the World Cup, and the day after the match, I was working with England, and his brother Gary made the point that when he first started at Sky, he did co-commentary on about 30 or 40, as he put it, second-tier games before he was given a Man City-Man United match. Philip it was relatively a baptism of fire, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he was thrown at the deep end, but there's no other way with a World Cup coming up. We did a lot of test commentaries with Phil. He did very, very well in them. What he says, if you listen to what he says, his analysis and how he reads the game is absolutely spot on. A bit of stage fright that night, bit of being out of his comfort zone. He was well aware of it. We went through loads of conversations. I mean, we were in each other's pocket for 3-4 days and talking non-stop. And I think you find with every appearance that Phil has had, whether it be as a pundit in the studio or as a co-commentator, he has got better and better and better every time he's done it. You can't just go from playing to doing it just like that. It does take, as Gary will tell you, he did a lot of hours on the radio and on TV. It takes a long time to get up to speed. Phil's his own man as well. He doesn't want to be another Gary. He doesn't want to follow that route particularly. He wants to be his own man and deliver his own opinions. And I think you'll find as the season goes on and you see more and more and hear more and more of Philip Neville, I think you'll find that, yeah, here's somebody who really can make the transition from player to pundit quite easily.
Thank you. Have we got time for one more? Yeah, oh, two more. You two, and then the session I think will be coming to an end. So thank you. Yeah, this gentleman here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Neil. I'm a freelance football producer. I think you touched upon it a couple of times, but in a world where some players are bringing us closer to the fans, essentially bringing themselves closer to the fans through social media, do you feel the clubs are restricting access or restricting what the players can say to a certain extent? And does that cause a problem for you guys?
I don't think clubs restrict players in what they say. I think players naturally themselves will be fairly cautious because of the world we live in, and you've got to be reasonably sensible as a player because things can be taken, well, highlighted or taken out of context. So as when you're actually playing, it's different to how you work afterwards because you genuinely have to be very wary. It's the nature of the beast. Every time you do an interview, you're sort of a couple of words away from disaster. So you've got to protect yourself a little bit, and that's why we sometimes get a lot of post-match mundane sort of interviews with players being very careful about what they say. But it's totally understandable. I mean, it's always been like that. But nowadays, they have to do so many different mediums, lots of hundreds of TV channels around the world now. There's loads of radio stations. There's millions of magazines. There's all sorts of different vehicles in social media. So it's a precarious game doing post-match interviews.
I think the access is actually greater in a way because they have responsibilities and it's in clubs' contracts with the Premier League that they must give media access to players and managers. So I think the access is greater, but it's more managed. You can't just collar somebody and have a word with them. It's more managed. And I do understand the club's point on that because they've got a multi-million-pound asset who with 2 words could land everybody in deep bother. So I understand why they do that, even though it can be for us as interviewers a little bit frustrating at times.
Still amazing, isn't it?
Soccer AM? That's right. But aren't you the guy that put that clip over that boy this week? That's right. Have you seen it?
So yeah, you can probably introduce it better than me, but
Well, the Man
this
United
guy,
fan.
that's
The Man
yeah.
United fan.
Anybody who go on Twitter, Neil produces Man United.
it's called Full Time Devils, so it's a digital YouTube channel, but for fans by fans.
And there's a little guy on Twitter. He's about 5 years old, and they've asked about Nanny after the game, and his answer is fantastic. Well, you produced that program.
Well, yeah, it's not real. It's a YouTube channel, but thanks to you guys, that Vine hit 1.2 million loops in one day.
I've not seen that yet.
I've done well for you there, by the way. I've done great for him.
You got 70 more now. Well done.
That's brilliant. Watch
I
it.
wonder where it was going when he pointed.
Brilliant. What was his name? William.
Let's discuss it afterwards, Robbie. Okay, final
Future match of the day pundit.
final question then. Make it a good one.
Hi there, Alan Clements from STV and a fully paid up member of the Tartan Army. My question is simple, is Alan Hansen really a fan of the English national football team?
I'd love to stitch him up and say yes, but not really. And I think Alan would be happy with me saying this. During the major championships, he would want us to do well. Want England to do well, I should say, especially here in Edinburgh, because it's good for us in terms of the BBC, when England do well, we get more big matches, we get bigger audience, there's a bigger buzz around those competitions. Obviously, it's never happened. But in that sense, he would support England. But deep down inside, no.
Thank you very much. Just before we go, any dream team members you'd have on your ideal match of the day panel, obviously excluding Robbie?
Robbie was right, I was on the tip of my tongue. But in terms of, what do you mean, the ones that we've worked with or somebody different?
Oh, no, somebody from
different.
The world of football that you would love to have as a...
Jose would be box office, wouldn't
Well, sounds like you've got a big fan in Jose. Obviously, you're a bit too blue for him.
A bit too blue. Leicester blue, though, really. Everton as well, but yeah.
But
it's funny, though. Everyone thinks Jose, they're saying that they don't like Chelsea blue. They don't like. It's amazing how many people genuinely think match of the day, a TV programme, do not like their team.
It is incredible.
Paranoia.
Match of the day, which has a few different editors that share the chair as well.
Loads of different editors, loads of different match editors, lots of different pundits, presenters, everything. The show does not like my team. They hate my team.
So Gary would quite fancy Jose to be there. Robbie, who would you like to have sitting next to you?
Me.
You'd still fall out.
You wouldn't want to listen to yourself, trust me.
No.
And on that bombshell, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being a great audience.